we've got sitting down here on the floor is the box from Coastal Moto. I can get this right and not be tongue-tied constantly. So let's pull it out of the box and take a look at exactly what we've got set up here. Like I said, it's still in a shrink wrap. It's not an unboxing video, all right? So don't even think about that. But there we go, all wrapped up, ready to go. Like I said, totally mounted, but I haven't taken it out of the shrink wrap yet. It's still in its protective packaging. So Coastal ships these things. You can order them with everything on it. You can order just the rim, whatever you want. They're over in Daytona, so they're not too far from me, being that I'm in Tampa. So I got it within, less than a week after I ordered it. And that's with the choice of tire. You can do a Pirelli, you can do an Evian, you can do, or what I have is the Dunlop, right? So it's the Harley tire. They just mount it however you want. So let's get this thing unshrink wrapped and take a look at it and see what we've got. Okay, let's see what we got here. Without scratching it. I will say they definitely put some effort into making sure that things don't get scratched up in shipping. Very nice, very nice. Polished rotors on it already. There we go. And of course, it's upside down. There we go. Well wrapped, shrink wrapped, taped. Oh, good Lord. There we go. So since we had a 21 on there before, we're going to put another 21 on. A little bit different than what was on there before if you've seen the previous videos on it. But all set, ready to go. All loaded up. Now the only thing is we got to make sure that when we put this on, we pay attention to the rotation direction on the tire. Which would be, let's see, arrow. This way. There we go. So let's see if we can get this thing loaded up, mounted up. I'm a little hesitant on whether or not I was smart enough to put my spacers in the right order. We're going to find out. So I already have the axle greased up. We will shove the axle in, see what we can do here. This ought to be a little bit more interesting. In the fact that the bike's lifted up and it was a lot easier to just drop the wheel off when I was taking it apart. We'll have to pick the wheel up to get the axle in. That ought to be interesting. Okay, let's see if we can screw this up a little bit. Now, let's chat a little bit too before we do this. The lowers, what did I do? They're painted right from the factory. I sanded them out with 180 grit to get all the paint off it and get all the ridges out of it. I actually took a file to some of it where some of the casting marks were, take the casting marks out. And then went to a 320 and then a 600 and then went to 4 different buffing compounds to cut through and get some of the scratches and stuff off. So that's what it was. And if you happen to see the earlier, if you saw the handlebars on there, those are actually just the handlebars off of my Limited that I put on. So I put the bushings in, new bushings, poly bushings, and I use those bars to make sure that I have the handlebar brackets actually straight. Right? So let's see if we can get this in and whether or not I've got the spacers oriented correctly. Which I also took the spacers and I did the same kind of thing. Is I didn't actually sand them, but what I did do is took them to the buffer, right, and just did it on the various buffing compounds. and actually polished up both of the spacers because they were kind of cruddy. Just make them look a little bit better. Doesn't really do anything for performance or anything like that, but you know, if you're gonna do it, why not make it look semi-decent? So, and I have all my various torque settings already on three different torque wrenches. We're gonna try and mount the brake calipers too. That'll help me find out whether or not I've got this thing actually with the spacers in the right spot. So it's the axle nut's like 70 to 75 foot-pounds. I have it set to 73. The calipers are only 13 to 26 inch-pounds, and the end nuts for the bottom of the fork for holding in the end cap, which, by the way, make sure you orient that sucker right. It's actually marked out so you don't screw it up. But that one's actually set at 175 foot-pounds. Its spec is 160 to 180 or something like that. But neither here nor there. So let's see if we can get this thing in. Get the first spacer on. I've already greased my axle probably way too much, and I'm sure there's some long-time Harley tech out there that's going to say that I'm doing it all wrong and don't use grease, use anti-seize or some, you know, other inane thing like that. And obviously, when I put the spacer on here, I got way too much grease on everything. I also took the time to kind of polish out the end of the axle as well, just to make it look a little bit nicer. Again, it doesn't really do anything for performance or anything like that. But hey, if you're in there, why not, right? So let's get this axle in if I can. Like I said before, if I screw this up, we're all going to see it. And I wouldn't be surprised if I did screw it up. Whoa, there we go. See, that's the first thing, is trying to get this thing in to the bolt hole. Yeah. Alright. And the space, that's why. Oh, Jesus Christ. Here we go. See? Screwing it up again. Already. That spacer's kind of hooked in here where it doesn't need to be. Get that spacer back out. Pull the axle out one more time, because it was so much fun the first time. Get some of that grease off there. I got way too much grease on my axle, and it's just pouring out everywhere, all over everything, making a bloody mess. Told you I was gonna film this, and if it's screwed up, I screwed up. Everybody's gonna see it, so there you go. Right. Axle in. Right side spacer. Man, I'm gonna have some cleanup to get all this goddamn grease off of things. Holy crap on a cracker, Batman. And I just lost that. Let's try this all over again for a third time. It's hard to do when you don't have the, you really don't have the wheel sitting where it should be, like, jack, be able to put your axle in and get it lined up and all that stuff. It's a lot easier if you've actually got the jack, which I'm still waiting on that to be shipped. Lord only knows when that's going to be. 6 to 8 weeks these days is more like 6 to 8 months, it seems. Unfortunately, it is what it is. The world is still on back order. So we'll get that when we get it. Alright. I'm going to change position here a little bit. My old ass can't squat like I used to. Alright, this will be edited pretty good. Alright. The other problem you end up with quite often here is your axles and your I don't know what your axles, but your spacing, yeah, gets to be a bit off on your forks because they rotate, right? They've been sitting here with nothing on them for a couple of days now, for a week, whatever it's been. And unfortunately, you got to put your axle in, and those lowers will rotate. You know, they kind of have a mind of their own. You know, so you kind of got to fiddle fudge them, move them around, get them straight and lined up, all that kind of good stuff. All right, I more or less have the axle. There we go. All right. Alright, well, we got it in, and we're spinning. Looks pretty true. So we'll get the axle in. I've also got the nut on here. What I've also got is a Mondo drift pin that will help me hold the right side kind of where it needs to be ish. Right? We'll get these nuts on this side snugged up just a little bit here. The axle from moving around too much. Alright. Probably don't need extension on here, but we'll see what we got. Now the other thing is when you do these, you're going to notice that, oops, if you have it untightened, you'll notice that the lowers will pull in when you first start out. There's going to be a lot of space in there that you're like, oh my god, what's going on? It's not lining up, blah 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 blah. Well, as you get into your torquing, they will pull together, right? That's kind of the way they're designed. Why these axle nuts have to have so much torque on them, one will never know. And there we go. Front axle is torqued in. And let's verify the torque on the cap. And that one's good. And that one's good. Alright, there we go. And more grease to clean off. Spacers aren't moving. That's good. It means they're bound against the bearing surface. And everything should be copacetic. So, I guess the next thing to do is see how badly, see if I got my spacers right, see how the calipers sit. I'll be right back. Okay, so went and grabbed the, off camera here, grabbed the both calipers. Now these rotors don't look, they look like they're, you know, you look at them and say, oh, they're solid, they're not floats, you really should have a float. Actually they are. There's actually springs underneath, so if you were to take these and push on them, they will float around a little bit. So they actually are floating rotors. They might not look like it, but they really actually are. Which is a good thing. I like floating rotors if I can get them. They're more expensive, but hey. You know, these aren't a true float where you got the discs with a wobble around and stuff. But now, when you do your calipers, remember, long bolt, short bolt. If you look at your caliper, you look at the mounting bolts, this one's a short one, right? This one's long, right? So you got short, long. Pay attention. Right? That's something you got to kind of need to deal with. Right? Make sure you don't put 2 long bolts in, or one long, on one side and 2 short bolts on the other, or something like that. So these are left and right. Way to tell, make sure you do it right, regardless, is your bleeder is always up, right? Because when you go to bleed these, you want to make sure that your highest point is where your air is got to be coming out in order to get all the fluid out of the system. Which, if we have time tonight, maybe we'll hit the brakes, but get that mounted, get the hoses mounted, those kind of things. And next video we'll probably be doing is the bars and the hand controls and all that stuff. Now, that doesn't mean I'm going to be doing the cables right away, because I got to get that beat the hell tape off of there in order to get the throttle cables run. But who knows? Maybe we'll use the existing throttle and brake lines, and maybe get this thing out of the garage and see if it actually will move on its own power down the street, just a little bit. So let's see what we got here. So I'll get the caliper mounted. Again, one long, one short. Short one goes on the bottom, long one goes on the top. I did bring a cheater device with me a little bit before I get to the torque points for these. Now we'll get both sides on once we got the threads in. These are a 10 millimeter 12 point. Make sure you've got a 12 point, because a standard 6 point is not going to work, right, on these. You need to have a 12 point. Alright, that's one in. That's the left side. Let's get the right side in and mount it here quick. And luckily, my daughter working at a Harley Davidson dealership, I gave her the VIN, and she was able to look up some of the information on the last service on this bike. And like we talked about previously, bike was in for service at 25,000 miles. It's got 26,000, or it was in at 26,000. It's got 27,047 miles on it now. So not a lot has gone on with it before it was crashed. And when it was serviced, it had new brakes put in. It had a new stator work done on it. It had a bunch of stuff. I actually have the paperwork. I'd have to actually look at it, to be honest with you. I don't remember off the top of my head. Didn't memorize it. Alright, so again, torque values on everything. These don't take a lot of torque. These are steel bolts going into aluminum. You over torque these things and you are going to strip that aluminum in a heartbeat. Don't do it. I know it's tempting to just go, how much torque? All of it. Okay. That's another thing too, while we're talking about torque. If you've ever taken, there we go. If you've ever taken what do you call it? Forks. If you've ever taken your forks apart and done your forks, you will find, see, that's the other thing, is these things are leaking out fluid. You will find that old fork oil, while it goes in looking like transmission fluid, it comes out, I don't know, smelling like a gym full of wet dogs. I mean, it just stinks to all hell. It's nasty. So, alright, and it would seem that we have a little bit of bind on the caliper, not the caliper, but the brake pad, mostly because the pistons haven't moved and stuff and whatnot. So, but actually, she's rolling. She's got a little rolling resistance to it, but not bad. So I think we're going to be okay there. That part's in and done. So kind of happy with that at that point now. since these are polished rotors, one thing that you can tell when after you've had a couple of braking sessions on it, if your calipers aren't set straight, you'll find one might rub on one part and the backside will run on the other part. It means your caliper's tipped and the pad is not making flat contact on either side. Right? So you'll see a wear mark, maybe on the bottom on this side and the top on that side means that the caliper's tipped. So that's usually just a little bit of spacing issues, and that's easy to resolve. But there we go. We now have a front end on, and actually don't mind that wheel. That wheel's actually pretty decent. I'll have to check the air pressure and stuff on it, but we had a 31 on there before. We're going to put a 31 back on there. And again, we talked about before, but when you put a 31 on one of these older bikes, you don't have to. If you got the Rushmore model and up, you put a spacer for where the front fender mounts, raises it up about half an inch, something like that. In this case, all you got to do is take the mounting bolt, since the bolts mount from the inside, not from the outside like on the Rushmores. There's no bolt welded to the back side of the inside of the fender like there is on the Rushmores. You take that, you drill it out a 3/8 inch hole. You just enlarge the hole just a little bit on the backs only, and then take your fender and just tilt it. That gives you enough clearance for the 21 to not have contact with it. They say another way to check it to make sure you're not getting contact is tape a 1/4 inch high, something that's about 1/4 of an inch in height. Tape it to the top of the wheel, roll it around, make sure it's not smacking the inside of the fender. If it's smacking the inside of the fender, you don't have enough clearance. If it doesn't smack, you're good to go. So I think that's where we're going to end today. Next thing we're going to do is we'll get the handlebars, we'll get these bars, the temporary bars off of there. We'll get the actual bars mounted. We'll get the hose lines mounted for the brake calipers, get those connected so they stop dripping all over the place. Since I have the bolts in them, but I don't have them set up right now. So they got the banjo bolt in there, but that's not going to keep it from leaking, obviously. I did drain out as much as I could. We'll bleed them when we get the bars together and get the actual final lines on and stuff like that. So, alright, there's where we're at. Have a good one, and just remember, ride fast, take chances.